The Blocktalk podcast started because of my passion for the property management industry. I wanted to start a conversation and add some value within the industry with a diverse range of people and professionals who can add something extra. As we start out, my aim is that the podcast offers some useful insight into a variety of views, opinions, thoughts, and foresights from our guests, who include business leaders and industry experts. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out any other information, head on over to brianwelsh.co.uk. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk podcast with me, Brian Welsh, and Jax Bruce. Jax, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. The sun is shining today, Brian, so I think the sun being out is always a good thing and a mood lifter. And I had a nice weekend catching up with family as well, so all good here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, actually. It was a beautiful weekend, actually. It's beginning of March, isn't it? So in fact, it's the 8th of March today. It was a beautiful weekend, and I'm looking forward to the PMAS dinner on Friday, actually. So that'll be really good. So today's the 8th of March. It's International Women's Day, and for the full month of March, we've been speaking to women in property management. Today, we're chatting to Annie Flint, founder of Under One Roof, a not-for-profit that offers impartial advice on repairs and maintenance for flat owners in Scotland. She has worked for Glasgow City Council and the Tenant Participation Advisory Service, and is now semi-retired and going to be doing some other projects. So Annie, great to talk to you. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing great, thanks, Brian. It's nice to be here and speaking to you.
Thanks very much. So I guess the burning question for me is, why did you start Under One Roof?
Well, Under One Roof was really just updating the tenement handbook, which and we should also mention John Gilbert here. John Gilbert has been my co-partner in crime throughout all of this. John Gilbert is a really brilliant conservation architect, like me, also semi-retired now.
Okay.
But the Under One Roof actually updated the tenement handbook, which I started writing in the mid-1980s. So I think you probably have to ask, why did I write the tenement handbook? And it goes back, I suppose you have to go back to when I bought my first flat in Edinburgh, this is almost 50 years ago. I must have been one of the first 18-year-olds to buy a flat. You know, at that point, you couldn't buy a flat until you're 21, which was the age of majority. And living in this block very happily. And Edinburgh Council used to send round inspectors who checked every tenement. And they sent out notices telling owners that they had to fix the gutters or whatever. And one owner, normally the one who lived longest in the block, would sort of come round and shut the doors and say, we'll be in trouble if we don't get this done. And we all paid up and the repair got sorted out. And then I moved to Glasgow. And the first flat I bought was in a terrace of listed buildings that needed huge repairs. And a residents' association had been set up, and they'd got architects and they got grants, and I joined them. And I was working in the housing department in Glasgow City Council at the time, so I was doing all this kind of work on a professional basis. So I got wedded in as well, and we got things done. And in the midst of all of this, I got my first factors bill, and I did not have a Scooby who or what factors were. Wow. And I looked at this bill, and it had this amount for insurance, and it was a silly little amount, and I couldn't work out what on earth could possibly be insured for that small amount. So as I sent in my check, I sent in a letter saying, could you explain what this amount for insurance is? Is this enough? Are we really getting something sensible? And I got no reply. I got the next bill. So when the next bill came, I replied saying that they hadn't managed to answer my previous question. I don't think I could manage to pay their bill. And they just came back to me saying they would take me to court. And that was just a red rag, wasn't it? Especially for a person like me. So a couple of days later, I was at a party. We were young then, we did these things. And I met John, and we ended up talking about flats and tenements and all these other things. And at that point, John was working with the early community-based housing associations in Govan and other parts of Glasgow. And they were kind of refurbishing all of these old tenements and making them fit for the next century, this century. And they were experiencing problems of trying to get owners to maintain the tenements that had just been refurbished. So we ended up deciding we were going to write a book on it, and Assist Architects, who he worked for then, got some grant money together, and they put in some of their own money. And I left my job with Glasgow City Council and I went to work for them. I wrote the book. And, it all just went from there. But of course, this is back in the 1980s, the mid 1980s. The moment it was written, it was out of date.
Yeah.
We kept putting in these sort of A4 sheets of paper, updating things. And these sheets of paper got into big wads of stuff. And people still love the book. People still want to give it as housewarming presents, and things like that. But it just got to the stage where it just wasn't sustainable to keep trying to sell it as a book. And we realized that a website was needed. So that was how Under One Roof came about. I mean, it took me 2 or 3 years to raise the money. And I think sometimes I was just working 2 or 3 days a week, just in my own time, going to meetings, etc., to try and convince people to provide the funding. And the person who kicked it off, who put the first chunk of money in, was Neil Watt from Hacking and Patterson. And that chunk of money he put in really helped embarrass everybody else to put the cash in, and things just really got going from there. So that's how Under One Roof came to be.
Wow, that's hugely interesting. Actually, I remember your book. I remember seeing it on some desks in property management companies and people talking about it as well. Because I'm trying to remember how long I've been supplying software to this industry. Probably about 25 years. So I've seen that book on a few desks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and people always said to me that, Factor said they used it for training, and they use Under One Roof for training. And we're always really aware that, Under One Roof, it's there for property owners and their advisors. And those advisors, they could be factors, they could be solicitors, they could be architects, they could be people who are installing energy efficiency. It's also for all of those people because, we don't really think flat at all, do we? Everything is set up for houses.
Yeah.
You just have to look back at what happened during COVID, when everybody was saying, stay in your home. And people were getting onto me and saying, I live in a flat. If I take my bin out to the back court, am I leaving my home? Am I using up my 1 hour of exercise in a week? None of these things were really set up to talk about flats. It's one of the first things, or one of the things that I did when I worked for Glasgow City Council. They kind of hauled me in to help them set up their computer property system. And I realized on about the first day I got there that it didn't have any kind of way of recognizing the communal property. And I had to get them to sort of change the system to set up a unique property reference number that covered the communal property, not just each flat. And I was really shocked recently when I found out Registers of Scotland don't have any unique property reference number for a communal property. We're still at that kind of stage. So, I just think we still have this huge job to do to try and get people to think about flats and communal properties and the fact they're different from houses.
Yeah.
That's one of my week campaigns,
Yes. No. Sounds good. Did you ever find out what the small insurance amount was for? Did they ever come back to you?
Well, I think I eventually found out after a lot of research that it was a small amount of money for fire insurance of the common property.
Right. Okay.
But of course, we all had individual common insurance policies which cover a certain amount of that common policy.
Sure.
But I would advise people going down that route these days. I would say get a common policy because
absolutely.
they are just so much better. More expensive,
absolutely.
but then you get what you pay for, I think,
Yep, absolutely. Nothing's free, is it? So you work closely with flat owners in Scotland. Can you tell us the most common complaints you hear?
Well, I'll tell you the most popular page on Under One Roof is the one on enforcing repairs.
Okay.
How you get other owners to accept their responsibility for their share of repairs and get them to pay up. And I bet every factor who's listening is going, yeah, we know that. We totally understand that. Recently, we've had more queries about water leaks from flats above and also queries about insurance premiums, why common insurance is so expensive and what factors commissions on insurance are for. A lot of people just feel factors are just taking too much. And I don't know if they are. Some maybe are. A lot aren't. But I mean, people just don't really understand that the whole lot of insurance is going up incredibly. And when they look on these price comparison sites, what they're getting is an introductory offer that is full of caveats, and they don't read the small print to understand that, I think. But it's enforcing repairs. That has been the big issue all the way through, and still is, and will continue to be, I think, until we get some really good legislative changes. I'll talk about that in a minute,
So we've had many conversations with industry leaders in property factoring, and one common theme that keeps arising is the perception of property factoring. With your knowledge, what advice would you give to the industry to improve perceptions?
Well, I think for a start, I think being called factors is harmful. I think it just evokes that kind of old fear of the landlord's agent or the laird's lackey. People had the power to turf people out of their houses for absolutely no reason, and I think it's really hard to kind of build trust with people when that lies in the back of people's minds. I think it would really help if we called it property management, because that's what it is. And then I think to break it down, I think factors have really got to think about the communications they have with people, and the fact that sometimes when you report something to a factor, it's like something's going into a black box, and you report something, you don't know what's happening. And when nothing happens, you assume that the factor is doing nothing. Mm-hmm. You maybe don't understand that, the factor is running around trying to get other owners to sign up, and people are refusing, going back to the thing about enforcing repairs. And I think it would really help if factors had really good communication systems for telling owners what's happening, and just saying, we are still waiting for some owners to get back to us, or, we are trying to get quotes, just letting people know that things are happening. It's not just nothing that's happening, because if they don't hear anything, they assume it's nothing happening. I think it'd be really good to have factors have more newsletters, to keep reminding people about things such as your agents. You don't own the property. While you may have more skills than most owners, you don't actually have any more powers than the individual owners do to deal with their neighbours who just won't pay up. And I think setting up owners associations, I think, is a really good thing to do, because they don't just help with communications. I think they help build in leadership. And I think the best decisions, and this is something that goes back to when I worked at the Tenant Participation Advisory Service, you always found out that the best decisions are made by groups of people who discuss things and all the ins and outs and the pros and cons, and they're much more likely to come up with a good decision than individuals who, just left to themselves, will often tend to think just very short term and sort of vote on the basis of almost fear rather than the future. So communications, owners associations, and let's turn the whole industry around and call everybody property managers, not factors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, that's interesting. I mean, I guess the communication thing comes into, CPL, my software business that supplies the majority of factors in Scotland, and there's a huge amount going on in there. So they have the ability to have, or factors, property managers have the ability to have client portals where the clients can go and look at this information. But I guess lots of people like to have things pushed to them, don't they? And rather than having to go and look themselves. So one thing I guess for me to think about from a communication point of view is how can we automate the communication and to the client every time something changes on that case, or whatever you want to call it, whatever they're doing. Because I mean, I get it. The property manager knows there's a problem, is trying to fix it and trying to do all these sort of things to run that case, or whatever you want to call it, through all of the stages it needs to go through. And the last thing they're probably thinking about is informing the person who told them about it, because they're being proactive and trying to resolve the issue, right? And so communication could come as almost a byproduct of that. 'Cause these guys are very busy, block managers, aren't they? So, property managers, property factors are very busy doing their job.
And it's also that constant reminder to people, if you've got that one owner who's not paying up, that constant reminder popping in saying your repair is not happening because. You just have to keep going away at people. There's no substitute for that constant going on at people about, you must do this. You must make it easy for people to not do repairs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of your projects should be coming to give me ideas for my software. I think that would be a great idea.
Look, I'm full of ideas, but the problem is you can have absolutely brilliant ideas and then people turn around and say, well, you do it then.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just don't have the time and capacity. But I'm full of ideas. I'm an ideas person. Just give me free rein. I will go. Ideas.
Great.
I love ideas.
Great. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, we do spend a huge amount of time, and we also interact with property managers and say, what do you want from the system? What do you want it to do? But where do we go next? How do we support your business? And where you want to go next? But it's sometimes difficult when you're at the coalface to actually come up with these kind of ideas to resolve the problems that yourself. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I mean, it does, but you got to have a lot of people. It's like you say, put a lot of people around the table, come up with the good ideas, and then move forward to it rather than doing it individually.
Excellent.
So we recently spoke to David Reed, actually, past president of the PMAS, and on his podcast, he talked about the industry needing to educate downsizers and first-time buyers about property factoring. Do you agree with that? And what would be your best advice?
Oh yeah, I totally agree with David on this. I mean, this has been one of my things actually is getting that kind of education to people. I mean, one of the things I have done, and this is something which factors can pick up on, is that I wrote an informed guide for Historic Environment Scotland. Okay. Now, they've never actually printed it, but property factors could download it and they could print it themselves, and they could give that to anyone who is, just a new owner, even some of the older owners, I would say. And it covers the basics of tenement management in older properties. It's intended for those new to tenement life. So people could download that, they get it printed, or they just send links to all new owners. But really, we need to get to people before they buy. Mm-hmm. We need to get them to build in the anticipated cost of repairs before they commit themselves to sort of spending all of their cash on a huge mortgage with just something left for doing new kitchens or windows, and they've got nothing left to pay for the roof.
Yeah,
I think people always decide they're going to spend the most they properly can on a mortgage.
Yeah.
And they've left nothing for repairs. They just don't anticipate that repairs are going to be needed. And I really think we need much better home reports. I mean, this was one of the things that I fought for. I was a member of this local conservation group called Friends of Glasgow West. And it was at the time I think it was the 2006 Act was going through, and we sent our chair through to speak to the Scottish Parliament at that point. And, we said to her, you must hammer the point that we need home reports. And we got them, and we've managed to keep them, but they do need to be much, much better. And I think the problem is they're built on insufficient information. And I would really like to see them having much better property inspections in there. But you can't expect the one owner who is selling their property to spend thousands and thousands on getting the whole property inspected. That's got to come through these regular property inspections. Mm-hmm. We were talking about at the Scottish Parliamentary Working Group. They've got to be done, and the results from those have got to be built into the home report. And that almost goes back to that thing I was talking about the sort of registers of Scotland not having this way of lodging these home reports against a communal property and relating it to the individual flat. That's going to be a tricky thing to get over. And I'm sure as someone who's in IT, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. Uh-huh. But people ought to have this information. They need to know what repairs are going to be coming up in the near future so they can plan for them. They need to know that a certain amount has got to be set aside in a building reserve fund every month. Affordability of repairs is going to be the key thing, and getting people to think about that before they even go and look at a flat, I think is one of the key things that we have to do.
Yeah, no, I get that, because you there could be one that's well looked after, and the amount of, and they've spent a lot of money on it, and down the street there could be one that's not been well looked after, and the home report probably doesn't come up with much in it to point towards that. So
Yeah, and also, a property in good repair isn't at the moment worth an awful lot more than one that's in really poor repair. I think there's a problem with the market as well. I think some adjustments are going to be needed there, and that might be painful for some people. I can see this coming though.
I mean, you can understand from the homeowner, or you can, maybe not, understand it and not agree with it, but you can see it. Okay, the one down the street sold for X. I'm maybe going to get 3% less than that if I do nothing. So where's the driver to do something? But then you've got, there's three people that think that way. You've got the three other people in the property who actually want to look after it. So it is a big issue.
Indeed.
Do you think the Property Factors Act has helped relationships, and do you think the Act could be further improved, and how?
Yeah, I've kind of got mixed feelings about the Act. I think on the one hand, it's been really great. When you hear people grumbling about their factors, you can point to the Code of Conduct. You can point to the fact they have to have that written statement of service. You can point to the fact that there's the first tier tribunal there to sort of deal with the things that have gone really wrong, and that there's a full complaint process. You can say that there is a mechanism for dealing with the grumbles and that people should use them. But then sometimes, I think of it as being like having this short stretch of motorway with miles of single track road on either side leading up to it and following on from it, and you've got this single track road leading up to the motorway, and that's properties which are in need of this huge amount, of investment and repairs. And then you've got the single track road on the other side. It's owners who can't afford to pay, or unwilling to pay, or just don't have that kind of maintenance culture. And I sometimes think the Act is just like speeding up the distance between those two traffic jams. I think we've got to deal with those traffic jams. You can't just keep dealing with this thing that's in the middle. There's far more that needs to be dealt with on either side just to make life better for everybody.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. So how do you feel the Tenement Steering Group is progressing?
Well, so this is the Scottish Parliamentary Working Group on Tenement Maintenance, which I think the government pretty much accepted all the findings of that, but it is going very slowly. And at Under One Roof, we keep speaking to Scottish government officials, the ones who are trying to deal with energy efficiency, the ones who are trying to deal with all the overcladding issues. And we keep saying to them that they won't get these situations sorted without having proper owners associations and proper building reserve funds.
Yep.
And these things have got to be written into the title deeds to make them work. But, we can't go down this route of getting 200,000 flat owners to commission solicitors and consult lenders, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to make the proposals compulsory by legislation. But, we're talking about legal proposals which would kind of sit on top of title deeds, existing titles. But there are some titles where, the development management scheme, which is what, we've based the whole concept of owners associations on, just won't work. Now, those properties, they are a tiny minority. But because of that tiny minority, the whole thing's got referred to the Scottish Law Commission. And the Scottish Law Commission are just totally occupied with looking at other legislation at the moment. And it's holding up not just standard maintenance, it's holding up the whole, these whole huge other government priorities such as climate change and dealing with that, and overcladding and fire safety. And somehow we've just got to break down this sort of log jam at the Scottish Law Commission and get these things into the legislative process much, much faster.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And every year that goes by, the stock deteriorates, doesn't it? It's not being looked after. Yeah.
Even if they just got development management associations and development management scheme compulsory in new buildings, that would make a start. Even local authorities could insist as one of their planning consents, you must have this written in from the get-go. That would that would make us start on things.
Yeah, because I mean, even thinking about things that have been built in the last 20, 30 years, there's some of them that are just almost unmanageable now because of repair issues and I don't know, massive amount of absent landlords and no desire to pay for repairs.
Yeah, I mean, I think we started off thinking about under one roof as being there really for the older sandstone tenement. I mean, we cover everything. We cover buildings of every age. But now I find myself thinking that there's going to be a priority coming up. It's here now. It's how to deal with newer buildings. Because, since about 2005, newer properties have been built working to what they call building standards rather than building regulations.
Sure.
And when you hear people at the Scottish Government speaking about the overcladding issues and how when they've taken off the overcladding, they start to find other problems underneath. So it's not just been the cladding and the fire breaks. They now find there's concrete cancer. They're finding whole issues of fire safety haven't been dealt with properly. I think we're going to find there's going to be this huge issue about how we help owners in newer blocks that is going to become an equal priority to dealing with the older sandstone tenements.
Yeah. So as this is the first of our Women in Property Management series, what's it like being a woman in the industry?
Do you know, it's quite hard to answer that because I don't know what it's like being a man in property management.
Great answer.
But, I can tell you now that I think it's much easier than it used to be.
Right.
It used to be when I would turn up on site and I started talking technically about skews and mortar and such things, or when I said, can I go up in the cherry picker and have a look? I think people, men would look at me and say, what? Who is this woman? What does she know? And I don't notice that so much now. I think people, particularly in the trades and the professions, they're used to dealing with women surveyors and women architects. They'll be used to dealing with women property managers.
Yeah.
I think I've noticed that change. So I think it's now easier. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think it's now much easier. I think we don't have that kind of outright prejudice that we're having to face. And I think there's still a lot of hidden prejudice. But I also think women are often averse to sticking their heads out and coming forward and having the courage of their own convictions, And I think when I look back at the times when I've had most impact, I think it's been where I've stood up and articulated what I thought was right, or what I thought was needed. And I've said so very clearly and publicly. Even if I've been frightened about what people might think, what they might think of me, what they might think of my ideas, or just frightened that the words might come out the wrong way. I think finally, when I've said things and meant it and stood up, I think that's when I've had most impact.
Interesting. My other half is in property management. She's a surveyor. She's a management surveyor, but on commercial property. And I have to say that over the years that I've known her, some of the stuff that she's done, and you'll be walking along Woodside Terrace and she'll be on top of a roof, and I'm like, you wouldn't find me up there. You wouldn't find me anywhere near that cherry picker if it wasn't on the ground. So no, I get what you mean, and I have had conversations with her in the past about tough days at the office and these sort of things and how she's dealt with it. And so interesting. So so at the end of all of these podcasts, we go to Jax, who asks kind of 3 quirky questions. But I just want to, at the beginning, we kind of talked about the fact you're semi-retired and you might do some projects and these sort of things. What does that look like for you?
Being semi-retired.
And doing projects and things like that. So.
Well, it means at the moment that I'm trying to plan to get away to take a holiday in Spain for about 3 or 4 weeks. But I'm also looking at some of these other things that are kind of behind some of the issues. And one of the things I would like to be doing is getting some kind of social financial institution set up, which could take people's contributions to building reserve funds.
Right.
Use them in a way that would be really helpful for other owners.
Yeah.
I was really struck. I found this organisation called Lendology, and they operate down in the West Country in England. And they got a big chunk of money from the government and from local authorities, and they lend that out to owners who want to make home improvements, whether it's energy efficiency or whether it's accessibility. And then they make these loans on really good rates, and they get a great repayment rate from owners, and they're effectively just got a big recyclable fund.
Yeah.
Helps people with energy efficiency and improvements. And I would really like to have one of those in Scotland. And I would like it to take in, all the building reserve contributions that people make and find a way of lending those out to people who need to carry out repairs and having trouble financing it. I must be mad to think about this, but people said I had to think about under one roof. I did it. So.
No, but I mean, it's a fair point because there's currently a building in Glasgow that's got a fairly sizable problem with a tower. And I used to live very close to it, and I've just moved actually, which is the reason I know, because it happened a week before I moved, and you could not get access legally unless you went up a one-way street, which they've now made two-way to get to where I lived. And you've got a building that has massive historical value to the city of Glasgow. And you've got, and I don't know how many flats are in it, but you've got all these flats in it, and the cost, it must be eye-watering, the cost to repair that tower, and how do you expect these people who live in that house to be able to do, or live in these flats to be able to do that? Because, it's probably the value of the house times 2 or 3 each, So.
Well, absolutely. And there are other blocks of flats where, we kind of went through this whole phase of saying, well, look, we'll just put all the costs on owners. And even people who buy a house in a new estate don't realise they could be responsible for maintaining the play area and all the grounds.
Yeah.
And we just shoved all these costs, which were once taken on by the public sector, onto private owners. I mean, there are blocks down on the Clyde who are responsible for maintaining the banks of the Clyde. And
that's madness, isn't
individual owners.
Yeah.
And individual owners buy these places, think, oh, there's a nice view of the Clyde. They don't realise what they're buying into because it's not really upfront in their faces in the home report.
Yeah.
It's gone back to the previous question here, isn't it? Huge problems that we just keep shoving on owners thinking that they can afford everything. But, low income owner occupation is one of the biggest problems that we face. We don't have the amount of socially rented housing that we used to have. So all the people in the past who would have lived in socially rented housing are now having to buy.
Yeah.
They're not any richer. They're just very ordinary people who are struggling like a lot of people from a month-to-month basis. They own their properties. They've got no needs. They can afford it, we kind of think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that you're going to pick up on a lot of these things in your semi-retirement once you've managed your holiday to Spain to try and do what you can. You talk very passionately about it, which is absolutely fabulous.
I'm having trouble holding myself back sometimes, and I keep trying. I think, Annie, you must have got to this age and know that you can't do all these things. I don't know
but I guess it's about kind of almost a legacy and making a difference, isn't it? And a lot of the stuff you've done in your career has made a massive difference to the industry. So I can understand why you would want to go further. So.
Yeah, I think I've learned. Well, I was listening to something about dangerous women the other day, and I kind of think I wish people were describing me as a dangerous woman. I wish I had that really thick skin to get out there and do things, and I'm sure there's lots of much younger women in the property management industry listening, and I'd just say to you, be proud of being dangerous.
Yeah.
Go up there, put yourself out. Because if I think about anything in my career where I didn't get things done, it was where I was being timid. And I got things done is where I've stood up and spoken out, and I'm just saying to other people, do it. Do it before it's too late.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, so now I think I've spoken enough, so or asked enough questions anyway. So Jax, if you're there for our 3 quirky questions, do you want to fire on?
Yeah, Annie, I've absolutely loved listening to you. You are inspirational. I totally agree with you about the lendology thing. I live in a block of flats, and it's a 1901 tenement in Dumbarton, and the street is so mishmash of, well tended to and well cared for buildings, and then you've got some which aren't so much. And I always try and think of how can we make it accessible and affordable to these people, because it would make the area look so much nicer if they were all the same standard. So I love your idea of lendology. I think that would be a fantastic thing to do.
I'm recruiting you, Jax. You're going to wish you never said that now,
yeah, we'll swap emails, absolutely. So the first of the 3 quirky questions, Annie, is what's your biggest failure across your entire career, and what did you learn from it?
I was trying to think about this, and I find it really hard to think of one individual failure. I can think of many, and they all come down to this thing about not standing up and speaking out, and sometimes always just sort of playing by that game of convention.
Yeah.
You have to write reports in a certain way, and I've often felt I shouldn't do this. I should just come straight out in the one paragraph and say you've got to do this differently, and I didn't, and I stuck by the convention, and I have regrets that I did that.
Yeah.
And I think I can't think of many failures, but I can think of things where I would have been much more successful had I just said, sod all of this. I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah. I think as women, we're conditioned to be more timid, is the word you used there. And
Look, everybody is. I think it's more so with women. But I do notice that younger women are much better at coming forward and standing out and doing things.
Yeah.
Us older women are. I'm really proud of younger women, and I look at them and I think, wow, I wish I'd been like that.
Well, I mean, to do what you did in the 80s, that was pretty forthright, and to start having those conversations and to move to then take things to where they are now. I mean, I think you're underselling yourself a little bit there as well. You've obviously done a lot to change things and to influence what's going on. So
I know. I suppose I keep thinking, look, other people could have done that quite easily. I mean, I don't know if I've had any special skill or any special knowledge, but I was just chatting with my local councillor the other day, and she knows me from other work that I do, in the local area. And we ended up chatting, and I pointed out to her that I'd written this website. And she said, oh, that's amazing, she said. I said, look, somebody else could have done it. And she said, no, but you actually did do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had actually done it. I had actually got up and acted.
Yeah.
I don't think I know anything more than any other people. I mean, there's so many cleverer people than I am around, but I think I just did it. I do recall actually there was a personnel director at Glasgow City Council, and he said to me, Annie, he said, the thing we all like about you is that you've got balls, he said to me. That's International Women's Day in a way to say.
Fantastic, that's great. So if you ruled the world for a day, Annie, what would you do?
Okay, it's International Women's Day, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know what I would do? I would deal with all this toxic masculinity that's around. I don't think about Putin declaring war on Ukraine. That's the latest. Bolsonaro in Brazil, encouraging people to chop down the rainforest. Trump. I mean, there is this toxic masculinity around. It's a small number of men, but they're toxic, And what I would really like to do is just take all these people, all these dictators, wherever they are, whether they're in Africa or Asia or the Middle East or Europe or Russia, wherever they are, I would just like to exile them on a tropical island somewhere. I don't care if they live in luxury. I don't care if they get musicians coming in and cinema and all that kind of stuff, as long as they don't get internet going out so they can't influence people. That's what I would really like to do.
Yeah, okay. Cool. That's a big vision for the world. Brilliant, I love it.
Yeah. And if you gave me 2 days, I think I would start to move down the tree to the toxic masculinity that's putting porn out on, every internet channel that young people get to, that's the next thing to do,
Yeah, sure.
That's my 2 things, just totally related to International Women's Day. So
brilliant. Cool.
If you give me more days, there'd be other things I would do, but
I think most of us would need more than a day, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Sadly.
So when you're 70 and look back at your life, what will you be glad you did or feel proud of? Something you've done or something you still want to do before you're 70?
Well, I'm looking now. I'm 67 now.
Yeah.
Eventually, almost semi-retired.
Yeah.
Way back, but there are too many other things to do. I suppose it would have to be under one roof as being, and the tenement handbook as being those significant, tangible achievements. I think those things I have to say that I did get done. I mean, there's lots of other things. I mean, in some ways, I'm a real greenie. I'm glad I haven't left lots of rubbish around the world behind me. I really do try and tread lightly on things. But I suppose the biggest achievement would be under one roof that I'll look back on and hope that it's made a difference.
Yeah, definitely.
Keep hoping.
Yeah, well, I actually referred someone to Under One Roof just the other week because they're having problems with getting the usual stories that we've heard today, is getting everybody involved in repair and maintenance work. So hopefully she'll be able to get some help from that website.
I do just hope it helps her. Yeah. And she's got to have tenacity. She's just got to keep going at it.
Keep going. I know.
Tripping away at people.
Definitely. Cool. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Excellent, Annie. That's been absolutely fabulous. I actually think we should book you in for a year's time to see what you've done in your year of semi-retirement, because I guarantee it'll be more than most people do working full time. Yeah.
Oh.
That would be
Here's
great.
hoping, hey?
Yeah, it'd be great to talk to you again. Anyway, thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. I just hope all those women out there, in property management, just keep making a difference, girls.
Thanks very much, Annie. That's been absolutely fabulous. Thank you.